I spent the last few weeks recreating another one of my favorite Skinny Puppy songs. This one's from the album Cleanse, Fold, and Manipulate. It's called Epilogue. It's a little 1 minute and 20-second long instrumental. They had the original sample sources, I imagine, on an Emax or Mirage. It took them just a couple minutes to create, but I did not have those original sample sources. It took a bit of time to find that stuff. But anyways, if you're an electronic musician who's into the like industrial music genre, I have a few things in Ableton Live I want to show you. First thing I'm going to do is play the original song from Cleanse, Fold, and Manipulate. This is Epilogue from that album. It's the last song.
Whose face has been battered, whose body has been scourged back and front, whose head has been crowned with thorns, who has been crucified and had his side pierced. It is my opinion that the man of the shroud is Jesus Christ.
Okay, so if you know that album or you're familiar with that track, check this out. This is my version. Again, all the samples, everything I found completely from scratch the last couple of weeks. I think it's very, very close. Here we go.
Whose face has been battered, whose body has been scourged back and front, whose head has been crowned with thorns, who has been crucified and had his side pierced. It is my opinion that the man in the shroud is Jesus Christ.
That is my version of Epilogue. First things first, many, many years ago, I had, when I was a kid, I saw a documentary called Atomic Cafe. Years later, when I heard this album and heard this specific sound, I always took for granted that it was from a specific scene. I knew exactly which explosion I thought it was. That's the first place I went for that explosion at the end. Sure enough, that sound fit perfectly. There was a guitar sound over the top. I have a friend that has in every synthesizer and an incredible guitar, multiple guitar rigs. I sent it over to him and I said, hey, would you just lay a guitar down for me? He came back and said, hey, it's just noise. So then I went ahead and did it myself. So what I did was I picked up my guitar. And I went up and down the fretboard and was just kind of making noise. I went through a Marshall. I'll show you right here. So this is my guitar group. And I have on here the Marshall. It's opening up on my second screen, so I'm going to have to open these things for you. So this is the Marshall UAD amp. I've got the, it says raw, but basically I had one of these years ago. I had the Rat. I actually had the very cool double Rat pedal in a rack mount. Let's see, I've got a flange on there. So this is what I put on the guitar brigade. This is a chorus at the end. I can put this on chorus as well. All right, so for the guitar, inevitably what I did was I thought back to way back in the day when I was in high school. I was in like this hardcore band. Some of the guitarists back then would do really experimental stuff. They would take power tools even. And what I did was took a screw. I took it over down the fretboard right when I got over the higher pickup. It started making the sound I was looking for. I then went up and down the fretboard with my fingers, just making random sounds. I multi-tracked that 4 times, complete noise, didn't give a shit what it was. I just was trying to get something in there that created this like crescendo, you know, this wow, I went up. And I thought it didn't sound exactly like Skinny Puppies, but I thought it fit well. The next thing I went to, and if you're a fan, then this is going to interest you most. So check it out. This is my some of my vocal samples. I've been doing this for many, many, many years. So I have a huge sample library, an even bigger sound effects library. And over that time, I've found a whole bunch of samples that are from Skinny Puppy songs. So I've just imported them into this one program that I had on my Kurzweil. Actually, my Kurzweil is right here. So this is what I've used. This is my favorite synthesizer of all time. Look, if you're a dork, check this out. I got a quick story for you. Again, when I was in high school, I called Canadian 411 and I called Ogre, Kevin Key, and Dwayne. I ended up getting a hold of Kevin Key. We corresponded here and there over the years, met several times. He's a very, very nice guy. But I ended up speaking with Dwayne for about 45 minutes or an hour. He just purchased a Kurzweil K2000 not long before I did. So he and I talked about sampling and some of the things, the incredibly intricate things that were in that synthesizer that neither he nor I completely understood at that time. It took me over 10 years to understand how that synthesizer really worked. And to this day, it is the greatest synthesizer ever made. It's the most complex. It's an amazing, amazing synthesizer. I purchased the upgrade. That's how I did my sampling for decades. Now I've imported all of my Kurzweil libraries into Ableton. So here I've got Ableton sampler loaded up. And behind that, you'll see I use all the time D16. This is actually brought in because it's a previous version, whatever. So I've used for years this D16 Decimort because it sounds so much like, it makes everything sound like my Ensoniq EPS 16 plus sampler, which in my opinion was the best sounding sampler sound. I've got EQ, EQ after EQ, dipping in and going wherever I want. At the end, I have Erosion, which is a Ableton, one of their preset comes with the program, one of their made plugins. And it just added a little sizzle at the end. But check it out. Here's some of the samples.
Before you came, I didn't think I had anything, but it would spoil things if you...
What do you know, really? You're just an ordinary little girl living in an ordinary little town. The world's a hell. What does it matter what happens in it? The world is a foul sty. Horrible. Faded, fat, greedy women.
Now, that specific sample, this, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this one is from, I think it's a Mickey Rourke movie. It's where he's a detective. Bad things happen with some gangs, some type of street gangs. But there's a point in a church. This is, I believe, what they're saying. I'm pretty sure that's where that one comes from.
He brought in every damn one of them people from the outside.
That's from Cyberactive. I think they ended up using that on Cyberactive.
She said, the world's going to change tonight, Doctor.
That is Halloween 3.
Nice and sparkling.
We all know where that one comes from.
One. This is Mission Control.
That's, I believe,
We'd have to cut his hair break for
of course, that's all Hal.
Everything hasn't been this conversation. I feel much. This sort of thing is cropped. I can very bad. What sort of thing is cropped up?
Oh dear, my mechanical masterpiece.
Now, I loved finding these. I loved finding these samples because you know what song they come from. Again, if you're a Skinny Puppy fan, and that's from an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where they have the guy that played Igor, which I'm at a loss for his name, and I can't believe I'm forgetting his name, but the actor that played Igor. But they actually had him as a character that would come back, and in fact, I think the little Martian guy in part was also based off that same guy, if I'm not mistaken. But that's where these samples come from.
If you only had never sent them. They're really far gone.
It would spoil things if you should...
What do you know, really? You're just an ordinary little girl living in another world as a foul star.
They're alive, they're human beings.
All right, so you guys know where all that stuff is from, but now here's the good one for you. I'm gonna play this, and if you're into like the forums and all that stuff, and you add and you have any input on the source of the samples, I'm gonna tell you this one here in just a second. But here's the sample from this. Here's the sample from Epilogue.
Showing a man whose face has been battered, whose body has been scourged back and front, whose head has been crowned with thorns, who has been crucified and had his side pierced. It is my opinion that the man of the shroud is Jesus Christ.
This sample now, here's for you guys that were wanting to hear this. So that sample, listening to the content, Jesus Christ, and cross, da, 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 I said, okay, it sounds like it's probably from something regarding the Shroud of Turin. So then I looked online, I searched a whole bunch of documentaries, a whole bunch of BBC stuff. I found Leonard Nimoy did a voiceover for a Shroud of Turin documentary, and I said, oh, this is probably it. It was not. It ended up being Richard Burton in 1979, 80, 81. And at the very end of that, there's a guy, and he's talking, and this is it. That's where that came from, that sound. Now, I could have went through that whole documentary and maybe found some other samples that may have applied to this. But I've got some other ones for you as well that are kind of cool, so check it out. So you see how I created that sample? It didn't sound like that, obviously. I used the D16 stuff and whatever to really make it sound like their old Mirage, which I had the one after that, the Sonic EPS sampler. Next, this was the very, very hard thing to find. So in the very beginning, there's these sounds, and to me, it sounded like some type of birds. So I started scouring, knowing nothing about birds, and I scoured everything. If you look at this track, this is all types of different samples for weeks and weeks and weeks from different movies, TVs, YouTube, children's Halloween albums, you name it. What I sampled and came up the closest to was Canadian geese, swans, crows, ravens, and it was another bird. But anyway, so I was coming in, I was really starting to manipulate all this stuff in Granulator. I was getting very, very, very close. Then I posted online and said, hey, look, I'm having a hell of a time finding stupid, I think they're bird sounds in the beginning of the song. And somebody wrote on a forum and said, hey, whoever that was, thank you very much, but said, hey, I think these are these cartoon gulls from this 1960s English or Canadian, whatever cartoon, and they look like they're pterodactyls, but I don't know what they are, whatever it was. So I looked, I searched, I found what he was referring to. I watched 3 episodes of this cartoon, and I don't know for sure that this is the source, but I was able to make it sound so close to the original that I said it's probably just a different episode. Maybe when they were kids, they liked this and just it was a cool sound or whatever. Maybe it was on one Saturday and they just had the sampler loaded up. But that mixed in with the Canadian geese and these other crows made it sound to me very much like the original track. Also in the beginning, there's a sound that I just called barn noises, but it's at boop, 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 boop. And what you'll see here is Ableton delayed with these settings right here just was perfect. And I just copied and pasted that on almost all these tracks. And once I did that, it was just making that sound. Then I had anticipated these background noises being trained. Now I'm listening very, very meticulously to this song, trying to figure out, And again, guys, these are probably about 4 or 5 samples. All this background shit is probably from one movie. But I didn't know that source. If you know, please forward it to me. I'd just like to know, just for kicks and giggles. But I then figured, okay, maybe the trains come from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which would have fit around that era. It would have been, you know, like a popular movie just before this album came out. And there's a scene where Richard Dreyfuss is on the side of the mountain with a bunch of strangers. They're all waiting for something. They're not sure quite what. The railroad track, things start freaking out and making these noises, and the UFOs went by. And for whatever reason, just because I'm, again, so into sampling and I'm thinking about this stuff all the time, I always thought that's where these may have come from, and it wasn't. Inevitably, it came from, I think it was Watership Down. There's a scene in that cartoon where I think it was little bunny rabbits or something that were kind of going across this field. And in the background, a train is going through a valley. And that train, if you look down here, you can see I did some crossfades. I pitched it up and down a bit. And that's pretty much it. And with those trains doing that, which you very easily could have done on a Mirage back in the day, sounded, I thought, very, very much like the original track, along with some other trains that I took from other stuff, just because I threw it in because I did so much dance sampling, I wasn't going to leave it out. The next thing I did was sample, I know this is getting long, but it was a lot of work. So the next thing I sampled was Kevin Key referred to a 1970s or so Halloween album that he liked when he was young. And I had a very similar experience when I was a real young child. I had a Halloween album and it had Frankenstein in the front. He kind of was coming out in this cool pose. And I used to just sit there all throughout the year. And I would look at the album cover and I just loved it. And I'd put the album on front and back and it was creepy as could be. And I was into that thing when I was a little kid. Kevin Key had said he had sampled this album. I looked through a couple albums. I found the album he was referring to. And Skinny Puppy sampled quite a few things that they used back in the early days off of this one specific album, because I ended up holding on to quite a few things. In there are these torture scream sounds, sounds of chains, rattling, it's all Halloween stuff. Also, I used a Minimoog, which is right here, that I did the droning sound in the back. I used granulator quite a bit. See, this is the bird stuff. This is the Canadian geese right here. And look at that little tiny bit that it's sampled of. I'm using of all that. So hold on, and it's keeping that in the back. More crows. This I bounced. This I had to. Some of the things I had to bounce because I just had so much processing and whatever. I just didn't need it. And then you got the screams, the explosion, and what else? I've got a rumble sound here. I don't know the source of that. And I think that's most of it. Oh, one more thing I want to tell you real quick. This is, so when I was doing Corleone, I found this sample that Skinny Puppy had done, and I ended up finding a source on the internet, and it was a woodpecker. And I added some little effect to that woodpecker sound. It fit perfectly in Corleone. I've since now, since obviously I was paid attention to that, heard that same sample in several other songs of theirs. This is one. So this is a way old sample, goes back to the sort of the beginning. So I don't know their original source, but for me, that woodpecker sound with that delay, perfect. Sounds fits right in every time. So I'll go through for you real quick and play for you now each of the different tracks so you can hear what it actually took and what the breakdown is to make this. And here we go. Here you can hear more of the Minimoog. Here's the woodpecker sound, here the crows. Those guys moaning, I pitched up and down.
Showing a man whose face has been battered, whose body has been scourged back and front, whose head has been crowned with thorns, who has been crucified and had his side pierced. It is my opinion that the man in the shroud is Jesus Christ.
That's my version of Epilogue. If you hung out to the end, you are definitely a Skinny Puppy fan, and you are into writing electronic music. If you have any questions or comments, by all means, share anything you've got. And if you have any insight, I'm always grateful. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.